6 Joy-Cons owned, and 3 of them started to drift. You guys remember when Nintendo used to make things that didn't break? Durability was all the rave. Although in fairness, I think there was always a little bit of an exaggeration. I remember the Nintendo 64 controller's joystick was just kind of limp pretty quickly after you buy it. But that also might have just been because of Mario Party. But despite that, I will say that for the most part, Nintendo consoles have always been fairly durable. Their hardware lasts significantly longer than you'd expect. There's that famous Game Boy that survived a bombing. And if I'm not mistaken, I remember there were pretty good durability videos on tests done on the GameCube versus the Xbox versus the PlayStation 2 to see which one can survive the highest fall or the strongest impact. And the little purple lunchbox would always come out on top. Our basement flooded back when I was in high school, and we ended up having to throw out our Xbox 360. But you know what survived? The Wii Remote that is right next to me on this desk. Also, as a reminder for you newbies, I am working on a Super Mario Galaxy 2 retrospective that should be coming up in a few days. So here's your chance to watch all of my previous 3D Mario retrospectives from December until now. Check out my playlists, they're pretty organized there. Anyway, throughout the years, I've had a Game Boy that has lasted a very long time, Nintendo 64 controllers that really the only reason they ended up getting damaged was because my brother and I used to pretend we were Batman and swing the controller around like it was a rope with a clamp on the end so we can climb a wall. Yeah, I told you guys we grew up loving Nintendo, I didn't say we were sophisticated. But outside of that, there was always little minor issues that these consoles would have, and they were usually related to a loose part that never would have gotten any damage to it if it wasn't controlled by children. So like the cover for an expansion pack on your Nintendo 64 would likely end up getting either lost or cracked because the kids play with it too much. Same with the battery cover on my Game Boy Advance. Or the flap that would cover the GameCube controller ports on the Nintendo Wii. Or the hinge on the original Fat DS. That one is not because of kids, I think that one was actually a defect. For the most part though, this was minor stuff. I think my original 3DS ended up getting an issue when I started playing Smash Brothers on it. The cover on the circle pad ended up sliding off, so I actually had to crazy glue it back on, and that worked out fine. The point is, I'd say for the most part, the consoles I've had have all held up. Yeah, they might have faced a few hiccups here and there, more so when I was younger than when I got older, but I don't recall facing many issues that were game-breaking, or console-breaking. Especially the controllers. Outside of the Nintendo 64 joystick, we've been pretty good. The only issue that I had personally faced with the Nintendo Switch when I purchased it, initially, was the kickstand. When I saw that the kickstand wasn't good, I was like, yeah, this is a pretty typical Nintendo problem. Something loose and flimsy and it will probably just end up falling off and not being usable anymore. It was hardly usable when it was working fine. I think the cartridge cover also kind of gave away eventually, but that's not really relevant to many people since it seems like so many people like to go digital. For the actual tablet itself, I don't recall too many defects on my end. My younger nephews are pretty aggressive with their console and they haven't broken the charging port, nor cracked the screen or anything. Initially, the only issue I had actually faced on the Pro Controller wasn't even a defect, it was an issue with the way that the Pro Controller was made. The D-pad kinda stunk. I don't know if they've since fixed it, but I remember people would take apart their Pro Controller and throw a piece of tape on the middle of it so that the controller wouldn't read like you were pushing 2 different buttons at once. I thought it was an overreaction because I wasn't playing any fighting games, and I don't think I was playing too many 2D games early on. It wasn't until I started playing Puyo Puyo Tetris that I really figured out there was an issue with it. The game kept reading that I was pressing up on the D-pad, which made the Tetramino just burst its way downwards immediately. It was really screwing up my game. My friends playing with me would have third-party controllers and they didn't seem to have that issue. They were thinking I was just making things up, so we actually switched controllers and they started facing the issue. From that point on, I basically exclusively used the Joy-Cons in the grip while I was playing anything 2D, or really any game that required the D-pad for movement. But despite that, I gotta say, I really like the Pro Controller. I have no issues with it when I'm playing things 99% of the time. It's just that D-pad situation, which most games I play don't require. Now to recenter the focus. Shortly after the Switch's launch, throughout the online forums, you'd notice more and more people complaining about the Joy-Con drift. If you jump on Google right now, search the phrase Joy-Con drift, set a custom range so that it only shows everything leading up to the end of 2017, you will see tons of posts and articles about it. This was a defect from launch. A defect that Nintendo denied for a very long time. At first, it was all about the warranty. If you could get back to them before the warranty expired, you might have gotten it fixed. After that, depending on the region you were in, it might have been anywhere between 2019 and 2023 in some places in Europe where Nintendo was finally willing to fix these Joy-Cons because they were required to by law. Let's make no mistake here. The only reason Nintendo would fix Joy-Con drifts is because they were required to. I want that to be very clear because I think some people forget that. They're happy that Nintendo is fixing their Joy-Cons. They're fixing a problem that they created, they blame the consumer for it, and they tried their damnedest to deny that there was any issue on their end. The crazy thing is, they never ended up fixing these things, and I can only assume it's because they had a ton that were already made in the factories ahead of time, and they probably still have some that were made before the Switch even launched. They probably just slapped different skins and colors on them as time goes on. But even until now, I hear of people that have bought the Joy-Con within the past year complaining about Joy-Con drift. So it's not like at some point they were on version 5 or whatever and there was no issues anymore. They figured they'd just ride it out. If somebody was to complain and send in their Joy-Cons, they'll fix it. But they know most people don't have the time for it. They might not have the patience for it. A lot of people will just go out of their way to buy another set of Joy-Cons and use those in the meantime while they send the old ones in. In my case, I'm a bit of a tinkerer. I'd fix them myself. There were kits you can buy off of Amazon for $5 to $10 and just fix it yourself, and if you were good with a screwdriver, that was pretty much all you needed. Admittedly, my fat fingers did give me a little bit of an issue, but for the most part, I was fine. Like I mentioned at the top of this video, I had 6 Joy-Cons and 3 of them started to drift. Now keep in mind, I don't use all of my Joy-Cons. For the most part, I only had 2. When Super Mario Party came out, I decided to buy a second pair because it required Joy-Cons, and the third pair was for the second Switch that we bought for my household 2 years ago. I wish I had kept track of which of the Joy-Cons were facing the drift issues. I don't remember if it was the right one or the left one, but I know that I fixed 3 of them. The primary reason I did that is because I just didn't feel like waiting to send it over to Nintendo and see when they can send it back. Plus, a lot of this happened during the pandemic, and that was just a whole other thing. So yeah, I just ordered it and fixed it myself. It was easier to deal with. Now, an optimistic, Nintendo-loving version of myself would be approaching this conversation in a very different manner. A few videos ago, I mentioned that there was an unwritten contract between the buyer and Nintendo. A few of you had a little bit of pushback on that comment, but for me, that's always been the case. I've always felt like I'll tolerate what Nintendo does because at the end of the day, they're better than the competition. So my glass half full approach would have been like, well yeah, only 3 out of 6 got drift. But obviously, now my glass is half empty. It's amazing how bad the backlash after the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct was that my tone has shifted so much. Do you guys know that they finally announced the price for that digital manual game? I don't even know what it's called, and I've refused to Google what it was called. I've just been calling it the Tech Demo minigame compilation. The one that they said you had to purchase digitally. So they finally announced the price for it. They're going to charge people $10. Which means if Nintendo is charging $10 for something, it's worth $1 maximum. Who in the hell are they trying to rip off that they didn't just include that for free? Please, somebody explain this to me. Actually, wait. No, I don't even want to discuss that right now. Let's go back to the Joy-Cons. In 2020, after a class action lawsuit, the Nintendo president actually apologized for the Joy-Con drift. This is before the lawsuit had come to a close, by the way. The president promised improvements on the Joy-Cons. In May of 2023, Tears of the Kingdom was launched. By that time, Nintendo had won the class action lawsuits that were against them for the Joy-Cons. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a mass defect issue with Tears of the Kingdom Switch Pro controllers that were suffering from a defect similar to the Joy-Con drift. Now, the funny thing is, in America, they didn't get away with it, surprisingly. But in Europe, the EULA stated that as a customer, you were not allowed to sue them if you agreed to use their product. That's why Nintendo was able to be so stingy and hold out for as long as they did in Europe. Now, in May of 2023, after Zelda launched and people were complaining about the Pro Controller issues, you could actually find a surge of articles online downplaying the issue with the Pro Controllers. There's an actual Nintendo Life article titled PSA, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Pro Controller Drifting After a Few Hours? It might just need recalibrating. And then they humorously included a subtitle that says, put the soldering iron away for now. Now, I'm not trying to put Nintendo Life on blast, I'm just sharing an article they sent. It might have genuinely worked for them, and I don't know if they ever followed up on this and said, hey, actually, this is not fixing the issue, but at the time, maybe they thought it worked. But they were not the only outlet that was sharing this information, and they all came at the same time. So yeah, do with that information what you will. Now, the best part is when people started trying to recalibrate it using the software that was built into the Switch, they kept hitting a bug. Many people feared the Pro Controller would face similar issues that the Joy-Cons did, which by the way, the Joy-Cons are still facing. But I don't know if it's because fewer people bought a Pro Controller, or maybe it's just fewer people have had issues with it. If you send the Pro Controller in for repairs, it's going to cost you something. Some people online even mentioned that it was $5. Which is ridiculous, but whatever, fine. This is Nintendo after all. The sad reality is that if we were not so close to the end of the Switch's life cycle, and more people faced drifts on their Pro Controller suddenly and started to reach out to Nintendo because they were facing those drifts, I guarantee you Nintendo would ignore them. You'd have to do the whole song and dance all over again for them to start offering repairs. Because, like I said, this is Nintendo after all. They've set a precedent. So I was always going to make this video. I was going to make one about the Joy-Con drift. That was inevitable. It was such a talking point throughout the Switch's life that you had to address it. I had to address it, especially once I shifted from doing retrospectives for the past week. I, as a Nintendo fan making Nintendo content, had to address it. I felt compelled to address it, because I am a Nintendo fan. Anybody that likes Nintendo had a Nintendo Switch and dealt with Joy-Con drift. So, why didn't Nintendo address it? How was it that not the first thing you said when you showed off that controller and you held it in your hand was that it had Hall effect sticks? Or, whatever the alternative was that you found as a solution for the Joy-Cons. Well, the reason they didn't address it is because it does not have Hall effect sticks. The only information we were given was that they were more durable than the Joy-Cons on the Switch 1. Which, need I remind you, until now, there are a plethora of articles telling people that the best way to fix it is to clean the dust from under the joystick. And that goes both for the Pro Controller and for the Joy-Cons. Now, I don't know too much about what Hall effect sticks are. I know they use magnets to recalibrate the joystick, and they're what the Dreamcast had. Actually, that might be the only information there is about what Hall effect sticks are. But I know that there was a drift issue on the Switch 1, and they did not address it going into the Switch 2. Do you know what they did say in the interview where this information was revealed? Which, I should mention, was an interview between the Senior Vice President of Product Development and Publishing from Nintendo, Nate Bieldorf, and Nintendo Life. When he said they weren't Hall effect sticks, he said, "They're not Hall effect sticks, but they feel really good." But that Pro Controller, for some reason, the first time I grabbed it, it was like, this feels like a GameCube controller. I was a GameCube guy. Something about it felt so similar, but the sticks on that especially. And then, I don't know, he went on for a minute about how quiet it was. So, let me pause this miniature hate rant for a second. I want you to take this moment and ask yourself, do you have faith in the Switch 2 Joy-Con? Right now, based off of everything we experienced in the past 8 years, and based off of the interview and what the Senior Vice President replied, do you, deep down, have faith in this thing? Because even if I were a Nintendo apologist still, all I would be thinking was, yeah, I'm not gonna get myself any new Joy-Cons until more people test it out. Honestly, even before all the prices were mentioned, I was never going to be buying any extra controllers anyway because I have so many from the Switch 1 and they're backwards compatible. Which, in fairness to Nintendo, was a feature that I greatly appreciated. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter anymore because I'm not buying a Nintendo Switch 2. I don't know what the rest of you guys are planning on doing. From the beginning, I've said that I don't care if people want to buy this thing, and I would understand why they would. I'm not trying to sit out here and create some banners and say everybody's got to boycott Nintendo. That's just not my thing, even though a lot of people in the comments are telling me that I need to start saying that. But whatever. What I will say is that it is never in your best interest to buy a console right on launch. That's when all the issues come out. That's when they all surface. That's when you know if it's worth it or not. Now, the plus side, if you do have an issue, they are going to fix it immediately. And, well, there's a certain piracy video that I uploaded that speaks a little bit more about launch day consoles, but we'll move on from that. I do highly recommend waiting on any new launch of any device until a few months later at least. Let the scalpers die down a bit, let people test it out, see if there's any issues, and hey, maybe you can pick it up used for cheaper. Or maybe the launch ends up being so bad that Nintendo ends up deciding to slash the price. You never know. But let's go back to the hate tirade, because I have zero faith in these Joy-Cons. But not only do I have zero faith in these Joy-Cons, the way the Vice President ever so diplomatically shifted the conversation over was almost cringeworthy. You guys remember when they asked Chris Pratt how he feels about playing Mario, and he tried to go on about his affinity for Mario games when he was a kid, and it just sounded so fake? Like he was trying to convince all us Mario nerds that he was actually a Mario fan, even though it's clear he was just picked because he's Chris Pratt. Don't get me wrong, I actually didn't mind that he was Mario. I'm not like super big on this whole thing where it's like, oh, this actor and that actor and whatever. The movie was fine, whatever. but it was the way he was trying to relate as a celebrity to the crowd that loves Mario. Well, this guy over here tried to do the same thing. What's the best way to convince the hardcore Nintendo fans that a controller is good? Compare it to the GameCube controller. Somebody please tell me, how on earth did this guy grab a Switch 2 Pro controller and say that it feels like a GameCube controller? What a load of Epona crap. I challenge anybody that gets their hand on a Switch 2 Pro controller to come back to me and comment on this video and tell me that it feels like a GameCube controller and mean it genuinely from the bottom of their heart. Because looking at this thing, you can be certain there is nothing here that feels like a GameCube controller. Has this guy even held a GameCube controller in his hand? Did he think that the Wii U Pro controller was a GameCube controller? They don't even have the notches around the joystick. Is it because the arms on it feel like they're thinner, similar to how the GameCube controller's arms were? I'm looking at the pictures and I'm not understanding it. And evidently neither is he, because he doesn't even know what it is about it that reminds him of the GameCube controller. Now, look, I don't know much about Nate Bildorf, but he's 50 years old. And I'm aware that there will be a lot of you watching this that are close to that age, so I'm not trying to be an ageist. Genuinely, were there a lot of people close to their 30s that were playing GameCube in 2001? I'm way too young to know the answer to that question, because back in 2001, I remember people that were that age were either playing PC games or not gaming. Now, obviously, he has a history of working with Nintendo. He's a special case. He did play GameCube. Like, I'm not going to sit here and try to act like he didn't. And for all I know, he might be the undisputed Smash Bros. Melee champion or something. But the way he answered that question just felt fake as hell. He easily could have been like, yeah, it feels like the Pro Controller on the Switch, but better. But he explicitly went out of his way to pick the most popular Nintendo controller and compare it to that one. This is like the time when Mario Galaxy was coming out, and they went up there and they said, this feels like the true sequel to Super Mario 64. Because they knew we would eat that right up. Even though, many years later, they claimed that Mario Galaxy was not in the same category as Mario 64, and put it along with the linear 3D World games. Which I totally disagree with, and if you watch my retrospective on Mario Galaxy, you'd know that. But look, generally speaking, I've had faith in Nintendo's hardware. For the most part, it's been very successful, very durable. But the fact that we went through the entire Nintendo Switch's life cycle and they never fixed the Joy-Cons on a production level and had to wait to basically have a gun to their head until they started fixing it on an individual level leads me to believe that this is going to fail again somehow. I don't know what their supply chain looks like, I don't know what their manufacturing looks like, but I do know that if they actually had a solution for the Joy-Con drift and they were so confident in it, they would have brought that up. That alone would have been a feature. They got so much bad publicity because of the Joy-Con drift. They could have gone up there, they've been like, hey, remember that Joy-Con that sucked last time? Well, here's what we did to fix it. But they didn't even address it, and when somebody asked them about it, all they said was that it was built from the ground up for the Nintendo Switch 2, and it feels more durable than the Nintendo Switch 1. A non-answer. I wouldn't be surprised if you take these things apart and it looks exactly like the first one. Although, I think there are some blueprints online from leaks, I don't remember, but either way. Either in their mind they figure if we were to address it, it would admit that we had fault the first time around and that would make us look bad, or they're not addressing it because they're like, yeah, these are made pretty much the same way and might deal with the same kind of issue and hopefully it doesn't, this is what we tried to fix it, but they don't want to talk about it. Regardless of which reason, I have no confidence in it. I have no reason to believe it's going to work fine. It's actually similar to how they announced the pricing. Throughout the entire Direct, I was waiting for a number to pop up. Price of a console, price of a controller, price of a game, price of an upgrade pack, price of a dumb tech demo, but they didn't mention a single number in the Direct. Nintendo, historically, tells you what their prices are because their prices are what gets you to buy their stuff. As soon as the Direct ended, and I realized they didn't mention any prices, that's when I knew it was going to be a crapshoot. If a Nintendo executive tipped a waiter a 35% tip, that would have been mentioned in the Direct, because that makes Nintendo look good. Anything that makes them look good, they will mention. The smallest thing they will mention. The only transparency I've ever seen from Nintendo throughout the Nintendo Switch era was when they apologized to us when they were restarting Metroid Prime 4. And it was only because after that long of a time, if they didn't tell us what was going on, there would have been riots. But when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2, prices, they're mute. Joysticks, they're mute. Actually, come to think of it, we still don't even know if they plan on upping the price for the NSO when they add GameCube. They mentioned they're adding GameCube. They mentioned they're going to be adding GameCube games, which will certainly be drip-fed. They mentioned that Game Chat would be part of Nintendo Switch Online. They brought up all of it, but they did not mention that it was going to stay the same price, and that worries me. Because again, if Nintendo was going to keep the same price, they would have let off with that. In any case, look, as with Nintendo hardware in general, I'm pretty sure if you were to buy a Nintendo Switch 2, you won't have that many issues. Technically speaking, the Nintendo Switch 1 didn't really have that many issues. It was one large issue. Although I did have some issues with the rail, and one of my Joy-Cons for some reason will not be read as an individual Joy-Con and has to be paired with the other one, but that might be a me thing, I'm not sure. Either way, as a fellow Nintendude, I'm just giving you a warning, friend to friend. If you do indeed plan on buying the Nintendo Switch 2 on launch, keep an eye on that Joy-Con. Store it in high places, make sure it is always in a dust-proof location. Actually, you know what? Keep it in the box, don't even use it. Because if it does eventually start to drift, you're going to be waiting quite a few years until Nintendo agrees to fix it. And if you're going to fix it yourself, well, it's going to take a while until the parts end up on AliExpress and then eventually make it to Amazon. I mean, you're looking at a good 2 or 3 years max. Alternatively, you could also just wait a few months and buy the console outside of the launch window. It's up to you, but be smart about your purchases, and best of luck. And thanks again for listening to me vent.